and we may get one more along the way. I can at least give you guys updates on the 10-year plan process. Can't make a formal decision today, but there's plenty worth talking about. So, start with introductions.
Vanessa Price from Town American.
Lindsay Butler, the Town of Newmarket.
Marshall Goldberg, Brookfield.
Michelle Mears, City of Somersworth.
Michael Williams, Coast.
Joseph Green, Dover.
Treasurer Jasper Lee.
Jen Sis, SRPC.
Colin Lentz, Stratford Regional Planning Commission. And Tim.
Tim White, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, Air Resources Division.
And Kim. Kim, are you still there? You have stepped away. Our representative from New Hampshire Department of Transportation, and then Megan. Hi, Kim.
Sorry about that. I have two mute buttons, so I didn't hit the correct one. Kim Romo from DOT.
Thanks for being here. And then Megan is standing by in the office on Zoom with us. And Lindsay, let me know if you want to chat after the meeting about the whole NPO process and stuff, if you're familiar, I can give you more context.
Yeah.
But in this stage of the process, we're at the state's 10-year plan process. So the RPCs kind of kick that off. Even though they just approved the 10-year plan, the whole process starts over again. And we start by pulling projects from the regions and ranking them and fitting them within a budget, essentially an allocated amount of money. So we have a selection of projects, one of which is a new market that we've talked about, and we have 6 others. So one piece of the puzzle that had gone unwritten in various communications, but what we do need to consider is that allocation. So I was unaware of that until recently, that of the 7 projects, we do need to fit those and select ones that fit in that allocation.
Plus one or two projects.
Plus 1 or 2 projects. So we have a little bit of wiggle room. This is for the initial review phase, DOT's process for feasibility and stuff. We are still, and these are the criteria that we used for reference. We are in the process of collecting additional data while DOT is doing their review for those projects. We have town staff that really helped with turning movement counts. That helps them determine if a signal is warranted in some cases, or how a roundabout would work, or what the best range of alternatives for individual projects is. So that is the second the second thing to navigate here, where we don't have complete information on all the projects, and I have limited ability to put together accurate cost estimates. So this is the ranking of the 7 projects as it stands, with Somersworth at the top here, and the Durham Point Road. And I wanted to get your thoughts on were there any surprises with the order? The Durham Point one, I wasn't exactly surprised, because it's a fairly vague project, and the Somersworth one is pretty well defined. So were there any surprises or issues with that? We have room to adjust how we score the projects if you felt there was something that was weird. It kind of seemed logical and tracked well. Okay.
Colin, are we supposed to be seeing something up on the screen right now? Sorry.
I have people in the room can, but you cannot. My fault.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Can you see the PDF now?
Yeah, got it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Very cooperative, Tim.
So this is it graphically, they're a little squished, so you can see this would be a perfectly scored project on the right here. And how the individual projects stacked up. So,
Colin, question. So having never participated in this before.
Yes.
It's kind of, like, to me, 5.5 is our highest project. Is that good? Is that low? Are they, like, I guess,
well, it's,
or is it after infrastructure is there, no project is really greatest, need, because they would have done it.
I think that's a good question. And it's 5 out of 10, so I guess you expect ones to be a little higher maybe, but my first guess is that that is a result of lack of detail on the projects, and there may be more information about what specifically is going to be in place. Your average non-engineer planner or whoever would be able to judge the projects a little differently. And so, one of the projects is they're planning to put in a roundabout. That's pretty clear, but complete streets is a general term that, for instance, it can mean any number of things. So as we get information back from VHB on what specifically would be put in place, whether that's just sidewalks or protected median crossings and what that would actually look like for pedestrians and vehicles in transit, that might make those scores go a little bit higher. But my guess is people in general being a little conservative with their vote because of that lack of detail. But I think that's a really good question.
So Michelle, that was your preference, right? Summers, whatever it is.
And it's in design phase right now, so we don't know exactly how it's gonna be designed. So
Yeah.
we're waiting on those details to come out. So Colin, I have a question.
Yes.
Once VHB does, the reviews of this, for other projects that didn't have that, will that be a time for the 10-year plan for the ranking or no?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, our final decision needs to happen by the end of March. So
Okay.
between now and then, we will have more detail on the projects and could really get into the nitty-gritty of how each project will address the concern at hand. So yeah, more detail on what might be constructed in Somersworth, or what the heck to do with the new market triangle, what specifically to put in there, because there's an obvious safety concern, but no clear, this needs X.
We're kind of caught in this challenge here where each cycle, we're refining the process with DOT of making sure that we have better formulated projects to feed into the 10-year plan. And so we keep adding these kind of layers of improvements to the process. But the challenge with this time is we're pressed squeezing in the engineering review right now to develop some of the designs and scopes and budgets before sending them to DOT. And DOT is still doing over the winter months, November, December, January, predominantly December, January, is doing their own peer review of those scopes and budgets to further kind of refine those QA, QC, and then have a final scope and budget for when we do the real ranking and voting of what to submit for the 10-year plan. The challenge is, though, we can't send everything to DOT for that November deadline. We can only send them, what would roughly fit in our apportionment plus 1 or 2 projects. And so we kind of have a chicken and egg issue here with doing that. So on the other hand, we do only have 7 projects?
Yeah.
Which is not crazy. Other regions, we heard one community alone had 8 projects. So, it's I think we're not in a bad position, but I'm just not sure that if we sent DOT all 7 projects, they would take all 7 projects at this point. Or they may say, okay, well, we're only gonna review your top 3 ranked, and we don't know. So that's why we're trying to, it's kind of like, you know, evil kid sports where you have like first cuts and second cuts, you know, for tryouts. Like this is the first cut right now.
So Summersworth probably scored higher because we had the stuff already for backup information.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no.
It could have, and it, I don't know, and I think, kind of getting back to your question, Marshall, is I think there was consistent lack of detail on all the projects, and that's why they all scored within a narrow band.
Yeah.
Between 3 and 5.5. So if there had been really disparate levels of detail, you might have seen an 8 here and a 2 there or something.
I'm also trying to break out where the difference is.
So-
First two by the size of these green bar, or these
Yeah.
bars. And it looks like the Summersworth project scored more than Newmarket on state of repair, which I think is pretty straightforward if you drive the 2 streets. And maybe a little bit on economic development, which I can also see a greater difference. So I'm just trying to break down where exactly people saw the difference between the two. Makes sense. I think it's pretty subjective. Honestly.
At this point, it's subjective, and it also is affected by where the criteria were weighted. So safety and state of repair were pretty well, took up a good chunk of the pie.
Like that blue safety category looks pretty even in the first spot. At
Yeah.
least. You know, so that's not what differentiates. Right. The orange may be a little bit mobility. Although the first 2 actually seem smaller than the second. Anyway,
I'm
I'm sure this could be broken out.
I'm more or less screwed with this graph.
That's not a good.
I can't put the little squares and the big squares and the rest of it. So, yeah, and I can, if folks really want to dive in, I can eliminate this bar and we can look at the bigger bars. So I took a pot shot. Can folks online see the Excel that I shifted over to the screen?
Yes,
Yes.
I can.
I took a pot shot here at cost estimates, Summersworth being the exception since they have 65% design and a real dollar figure. Newmarket's project is probably the worst ballpark estimate since it's such a potentially big project, but could ultimately just be a signal. It could be something needs to be done at every single corner of the triangle, or it could be one thing at that intersection. Based on conversations with the town and with BHP and other folks, I don't really expect that to be a ginormous project. There could be some signage and curbing and stuff at various parts of the intersection, but for the most part, except for that one really, the one leg where the safety problem really is, there's good infrastructure at the other 2 corners of the triangle. So that's the worst one to go on probably. The UNH roundabout, that was fairly easy. I just used a few other examples from around the state, and I rounded up to a cool million. They don't have any right-of-way issues there because it's either state or university owned. This one, the second one at Summersworth, again, this is a real ballpark, but again, from conversations with the city and DHB, there's not room necessarily for a roundabout there. So that would be a big deal project in that case, but anticipating something a little lighter. The Lee bike path, this is from a cost estimating tool from Massachusetts. These are, it goes out to 2030, but the tool was made before COVID-19. So right now, DOT is experiencing cost escalations at up to 30% on individual projects, but who knows what that's going to be like in 10 years. I'm not sure. Let's hope that they don't stay that high for the next 10 years. But that's a conservative estimate. That includes a few bells and whistles, like really fancy lighting and things like that. So I would hope the costs would be a little lower
We're not
because,
fancy like town at all, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of extra expenses that we're like.
yeah, so this is
Maybe a
a
lot less.
conservative estimate for whatever 3/4 of 2,100 feet of separated use path where right of way is an issue.
It's really high for that.
It's insanely high.
So it's based on Massachusetts,
Right.
where costs may be a little higher and they have a really big program. And I think in Massachusetts, their bike ped program has gone crazy recently, and they're building separated multi-use paths all over the place. So there is definitely an escalation factor there.
Do they have to buy into the land that they're using too, or do anything that way, or is it all of this is town?
In this project,
Yeah,
I think the right of way will be very low.
I mean, in Massachusetts, when they're doing.
Oh.
Figuring, do they have to?
It probably includes a higher right of way cost. They're doing it on rails, on rail right of ways,
Okay.
which in some cases they may need to purchase from, long dead rail companies. And the center triangle in Lee, again, it's not clear what the best alternative here is, but there's going to be some realignment of roads. Probably, hopefully minimal right-of-way costs, but realignments do cost a pretty penny, and that's a doozy of an intersection. So that being said, the projects that fit within our allocation plus one or two gets us through the bike path, so half of the projects. It's probably too small to see, but this is $4.4 million, the top two. And then plus one or two projects gets us halfway. So that's kind of where things stands with all of the asterisks of these are terrible cost estimates except for the top one. And this is where most folks are in other cases, I think, where DOT kind of understands that these are ballpark estimates.
So what, the regional allocation of 5 million, right?
Yes.
Is that for next? How does that? Work?
That's for 10 years from now.
Yeah, so that is, we don't have that money sitting around, that there's 60 million that DOT sets aside for all 9 regions to program new projects. And so the deal with DOT, they say, if you send us some new projects that fit within that, we'll put them in the technical plan. So that's, and it's just with all the moving parts, did we get a little bump in that? So it's just over 5 million. That's based on what was sent just. I couldn't find the email or anything that said specifically, but I thought.
That's our old application,
I
right?
think that
Is that the 50,000 or the 50 million?
that is from the most recent Excel that I could find from Bill.
They said to use the 6 million, the 60 million. I can remember today.
Okay.
Who sent those out originally, William?
This was from the RPC directors Excel.
Around 5.
Yeah.
Or, no, sorry, from the 10-year plan. I can go back and look at it.
Well,
Yes, Mike.
So I'm just thinking about how this could play out, especially given how potentially inaccurate some of those amounts could be. And if let's say we could do 4 projects, but that 4th one was just too big to fit in as the 4th, but maybe the 5th one could fit in, it's much smaller. Is it possible to get the first 5 submitted? Like, is that too many? Because it would leave open door to options if we end up with our first couple projects are 4.5 million. There's not enough left to cover our next priority, but we could cover the second next priority. Like, is that a possibility or is that more
So
unstable?
it is essentially up to the TAC and policy to mix and match. So using the scoring to help, but as you kind of alluded to, that's,
Fine.
so it's 5.
5.846797 is the 60 million.
That's our number. 5, 8.
$5,846,797.
Okay, that gets us a little farther.
Yeah, so I know we each had approximately another million.
So that's the first 3 those are covered by that allocation. So that gets us down through the Summersworth Maple Street project.
If it was plus 2 more.
If it was plus 2 more. So this is just for the initial review. But as you were asking about it is up to TAC. These are the priority projects that came through. So if you all recommend it to the policy and they went that we include the Durham Point Road, even though that was the lowest scoring one, that is within your right. So using the scoring as a guide, but to say, hey, this project is really going to be needed for X, Y, and Z, that could be included in the expensive number. But as it stands right now with these terrible cost estimates, we would be able to put forward 5 of the 7 to DOT for their initial review. And then bear in mind that if DOT and if VHB comes back and said, hey, this is going to be $1 million project, not 800,000, then we would have to recalculate for the final vote before the end of March.
Yeah, it just maintains more options for that final.
Yeah. So that's a good question, is what projects should go forward, considering that we're going to have to make the final cut in March, where this one we get 2 bonus projects, but we're not going to get those in the end.
So the DOT decides what the actual budget is.
No, well,
Yes or no?
yes and no. So every 2 years we review it. That amount of money is based on the population in the region and the miles of federal aid eligible highways. So not locally owned roads. So that changed an infinitesimally small amount with the 2020 census and some adjustments on the roads. That got a little boost this round, I think. And that's all negotiated between the RPCs and DOT. So it's a
So does the
quantitative
DOT appear for the town on a plan? Does the DOT buy, all of the materials to make that what they said was the budget or the estimate, that they cleaned up everything, right?
I think I understand what you mean, that we will get real engineered cost estimates that will be much closer and give TOT a lot more confidence that the project will be feasible 10 years from now, remembering that. And some of these projects will be, DOT will take care of them because they're on a state route. Other ones may require more local participation or match.
Um,
So the DOT isn't providing the budget, you're providing.
So the budget comes from the federal appropriation. And if you ever have a chance to see, DOT does a presentation where they have this ginormous chart that's the color of money. And so there's these different buckets in
Right.
what you can use the federal dollars for. And so this is really just looking at one of those buckets. The challenge that we're looking at is there's also discretionary programs that are the more competitive grants. And so some of these things would be good discretionary projects. So when we do the 10-year plan process, it's really those projects that are going to use those surface transportation program dollars. They're typically like the road projects. And those, we look at and budget out 10 years in advance. We have a state 10-year plan. And what we're looking at programming right now is, I know this seems crazy, we're looking at programming the last 2 years. So that's 2023 and 2033 and 2034, which is horribly terrifying. So I'm kind of looking at this, and I just sent an email to DOT to be like, hey, we're in the meeting now, trying to like figure out what to send you. We need some help. And Kim's on Bill just joined. Hi, Bill. Perfect. So we're trying to work through that. And like, I'm looking at the Summersworth project that is the top ranked project, and knowing those discretionary programs, that's probably a really good safe streets for all candidate projects. So that it's trying to decide like how we move things forward and what we move forward and things like that.
So I just have a question.
Yeah.
Just get discretionary spending, push the project up possibly to happen sooner
Yes.
than
Yes.
10 years from now. So I
So,
think Summerboard would be interested in that.
Yeah.
In the discretionary.
and some of the projects may be a slam dunk for the TAC program or the Safe Streets and Roads for All. You know, we have we applied for that so that we could write a plan for the region. So that Summersworth project would fit in that plan, definitely. The lead, and speaking of the buckets, some of these projects could fit in multiple buckets where the lead bike path, the multi-use path, could be in the 10-year plan. And then we could apply for a TAC grant a year from now, and that project would start getting constructed 3 or 4 years from now rather than 10. And that is also an ability. The caveat there is that the TAC grant comes with a required 20% match. So Barrington went for the 10-year plan for their new sidewalks last cycle because it could get 100% federally funded through the 10-year plan process. And they didn't have the 20% match. That's a detailed example.
But it needs to be listed on the 10-year plan in order to get that funding, to apply for those funds.
No,
No?
no,
Okay.
no, you can have,
MTP.
you can have a brand new project and apply for TAC. Yeah, Bill, you want to chime in?
Thank you, Bill, for
Thank
joining
you
us.
thank you for hopping in.
You're welcome. Good morning, everyone. So I apologize for jumping in late. I guess, Colin, just using the Barrington example that you came up with, especially with the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a lot of confusion out there, confusion on all of our parts as to what is the best approach to take for projects. As communities and MPOs and TACs and such are considering the different proposals that are in front of you, one of the big things to remember, and I'll use Barrington as an example, where they chose to move forward with a 10-year plan proposal versus a TAP proposal, although they don't have to necessarily come into a program of funding that requires local match, it also takes some decision-making away from them. As a TAP project, if Barrington had been funded and applied and been funded under the TAP program, the project would be theirs to make decisions on exactly what they want to do. If the town of Barrington, as a 10-year plan project, wants to disagree with what the department wants to do, they can disagree with that. But ultimately, the department's going to do a project or not do a project based on what we feel is necessary for that area. And if there isn't public support, then ultimately we could walk away from it as a department.
That's a really good point.
So there's other considerations to be thought about other than just financial. And even in the Barrington case, as a 10-year plan, if there are sidewalks or other attributes being added as part of the project, the town will be expected to sign on to supporting that project financially. in the long term for the operations and maintenance of those facilities that are really serving that local area.
Yeah.
So I guess I offer that because we hear a lot more recently about towns choosing, well, do we go with a discretionary, do we go with a 10-year plan? A discretionary program might get us funded sooner, but the other way, the 10-year plan, as much as it's, how did you just describe it, Jen? Really eerie or scary to think so far out. There's a whole bunch of considerations that should be considered, and ultimately, if communities are looking for infrastructure that is really supporting their local needs, that locally they're going to need to be involved and probably involved financially more than they might realize when they're first submitting an idea or a proposal.
We're scared and stunned.
And I don't know where you hopped in, Bill, but we were looking at the dollar figures and what the potential projects were. And with our allocation plus 1 or 2 projects, we're looking at 5 of the 7 projects potentially, according to the scores that where they ranked thus far.
Okay.
That being said, that we still we're getting count data to our engineering support team as fast as humanly possible so that we can meet that November deadline. We do not have a quorum today, so the TAC is unable to make a formal vote on a recommendation here.
We're one short, but we have people who count.
Yeah. So I don't know what options we have for with the emergency.
Check our rules. I know for policy in the commission, the chair can declare a quorum if there's something that needs to be voted on. And we usually only do that if we can, like between the room and the screen, have a quorum, which we do. But I can check our staff bylaws to see. We have some. Oh,
And I apologize. Jen, I'm just reading your email. Glenn and I are looking at your email now, so we're reviewing it and thinking about it.
my email was what prompted you, and I was like, yes.
No, I had already snuck in.
So yeah, so Bill, like what I just sent you quickly in the email while we were sitting here is we were kind of looking at these numbers going, okay, we kind of sort of know if these are good numbers or junk numbers, because VHB is still working on this process. So we kind of feel like we're in a chicken and an egg situation here in trying to kind of like narrow down and do that first round of cuts for what we would send you in November for the DOT peer review of projects.
Yep.
So yeah, just trying to figure out like, where do we draw the line, and is it the number of projects versus something else, or would you consider an extension 1 week in November so we could send them on November 18th when our policy would meet?
Yeah, so we can't consider the extension. I think what most TACs are doing is they're having their engineering costs completed prior to making a recommendation. So unless the TAC feels very, very strongly about a particular list of projects, most are waiting for the engineer to finish their work and then making recommendations based on what that engineered scope is.
And if we do that, we'll miss your November 11th deadline.
Unless you guys schedule special meetings or something along to do that.
The trick is we have one more TAC meeting, but we do not have another policy.
It's the policy meeting. Yeah, we would definitely have time for a TAC meeting. Could we do a policy a week early in November?
Do a special.
Oh, we couldn't even because it's Veterans Day.
Yeah. Unless they want to meet immediately after the TAC meeting.
Your joint TAC policy meeting.
We could do a joint TAC policy meeting.
There's overlap.
There is for at least a couple of you. Yeah. That's the other option. Because we know,
What are you thinking about that commission aspect of that question?
Mhm.
When I'm looking at some of these things, I'm looking at new market thinking, that's not a 10-year way plan like that. That's a dangerous, like that needs to be taken care of. And I look at the German ones, which do that well, it's kind of because I think in 10 years they'll really need that more. So
Right.
I'm starting to look and go, well, okay, so, and then when you think about like Summersworth and Main Streets, is that something you want to not have more say in? And of course, the Lee, the town center, that's not really what he was saying as far as DOT. So all the things that we just heard make me readjust where I think.
And you're right, the
Yeah.
Durham roundabout is a proactive project where that will
Yeah.
probably
Great
be
10
needed
years.
in 10 years.
Right.
yeah,
And I don't know how things go exactly, but the actual transportation parts of the Summersworth project may take 10 years with all the utilities and stuff. Looking at the Stratford Square in Rochester, it took them a while to, they had to knock down an apartment building and put new conduit underground and all that stuff. And you're right, some of the safety ones are needed now.
Yeah, like now.
And again, those projects would fit well within a regional safety plan that we hope to get funded and developed. And those projects would be eligible for other buckets of money to construct them sooner than 10 years.
So along those lines,
Yes.
if these projects like Summersworth, you said would prefer to go sooner on the Main Street project, what are the implications of having it in the 10-year plan if then they pursue those other buckets of money and funding and do the project sooner? So then does that mean we should have more alternative projects in the 10-year plan so that when Summersworth bumps up, we have more projects already kind of in the queue?
We get to do that every 2 years essentially. So if a project any project gets pulled out of the 10-year plan and moved forward, if another funding source comes up and they get that funded, that's not a problem.
Okay.
We don't necessarily organically get to move projects up the queue. We get to look at new projects every 2 years. There isn't, a perfect queue of projects that one shifts up if another one moves out.
Yeah.
Do we get that allocation back if one moves out, or is it just as if we just didn't allocate the project that cycle?
we have
Essentially
in the past.
that one. We can, what did you say?
You said opposite
We've
things.
been
Yeah, we did.
In the past, sorry, if a project went in as 10-year plan and then say that CMAC funds, as regions, we've been able to backfill the 10-year plan project. I think the caveat that Bill is probably about to say and would say is that with all of the uncertainty with project funding right now, I don't know that we could guarantee that as something in the future.
So are that estimated costs, is that just construction costs or is that designs, or are these projects in design and would just be shelved for 10 years? Or is
No,
it
it's
was design and construction costs?
design and construction as far as I can. So the top one is definitely design and construction. I
Okay.
included right-of-way considerations as far as I knew, and at the very least, projects under $1 million, it's about 15% of the construction cost will be design. But taking into other considerations, if it's just a crazy project that's going to take PhD. So,
So it's not like they're designed now and then the
correct.
shelf for 10 years?
They have just preliminary designs at this point.
Okay.
So,
Well, we're under design right now.
yeah, Summersworth is under design because that was engineered before, but our consultant VHB is working on actual, I don't know what it'd be, 20% design, 15% design for
So
this
you have
submission.
an engineer on board to come up with estimates for the 10-year plan project?
Yes,
Separate from like Summersworth?
correct.
Okay,
Yeah, so they had their own consultant for that project and it's already in their CIP and everything.
yeah.
Where we're developing projects from scratch. And this is the first year we've had the help of VHB. It's just the timing got screwed up and we were hoping to have designs by now. But there was a whole with the IGE process and everything and needing more traffic counts. So just, this is where we are.
So a question on the decision-making process here. So the communities get to, I guess, where is it the community's role to say, we want to pursue this as a 10-year plan project versus one of the other discretionary sources? Even if it could be eligible for discretionary or whatnot, versus the, our role here of saying, we think this should be a discretionary versus a 10-year, so we're going to bump it out of the rankings or not.
Jen, can I answer that? So if the question is you're considering a list of projects, whether they would be appropriate for the 10-year plan or appropriate for a discretionary program, none of the projects on that list right now, unless there is true engineering design work done, unless you are looking to submit for a planning grant for any of those projects, none of them are ready for a discretionary program here that the feds are offering. We would strongly recommend that you consider them all for inclusion in a 10-year plan and come up with their priorities for the 10-year plan. As part of that, yes, you get the scariness of having a project construction out in 33 or 34 somewhere as a starting point, but you do get the opportunity to start design an appropriate number of years earlier. And once you have a foothold in a 10-year plan, then you can look at alternate funding sources, other discretionary programs, whether it's Safe Streets for All, the Reconnecting Communities pilot program, a number of others that are out there to see if there are opportunities to advance the project along. All of those discretionary programs are going to ask about what planning processes have been followed, what transportation planning documents are those projects part of, what type of local, regional, statewide support have those projects already shown. And so by establishing a project in the 10-year plan, you're going to be able to check a lot of the boxes that will make that potential discretionary project much more competitive later on.
So we can submit all these projects, is what you're saying?
All of these projects are eligible for submission to the 10-year plan.
Okay.
And so by default, any of these projects will go back to will stay in our metro plan and have a engineered design and review. So all of these projects will be eventually, once the design comes in, eligible for the 10-year plan or one of the discretionaries. So for instance, if for some reason the Lee bike path doesn't move forward in the 10-year plan process, that would be in our metro plan and could be eligible for transportation alternatives round in the near future, or some other, there's also a safety, safety consideration there. So, yeah. So that's what with the help of VHB, what we're really trying to do is build a pool of projects in our long range plan, our metro plan, so that we have in the future could have 15 projects to choose from next time. We'll have 15 projects and then eventually have to score and rank a number of projects, not just 6 or 7. And that sounds like a lot to do, but we won't have to be waiting for engineering cost estimates, and we can take 6 months to do that process little by little instead of, can we have a joint tech and policy meeting because we need to make a decision?
Yeah, it may make sense to do it.
Yeah, so we will have more information and more time.
Every year we start earlier. I don't think it matters how early we start, we're always going to be.
I know. Colin, there's something in the chat. Oh.
That might be technically correct.
Megan's coming to the rescue.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
And Matt.
Well, my math is not that great, so you better double check me.
Was correct there, though.
Okay,
So,
so if we do have a quorum, so the decision before you all is what projects to recommend to the policy for their review. And Adjourn, we do have a quorum apparently,
oh, that's
because
fabulous.
Farmington does not currently have a rep, and so it just changes the math in our favor.
Do we need to call the meeting to order then?
We do technically need to call the meeting to order
Introduce
and
yourself.
and vote on the
Just like you did before.
You don't remember?
We're killing it today. All right.
All right, so
So I guess the question for you all is, do you feel you have enough information to make a decision today? Versus would you rather wait until November 4th and we can work on setting up a joint meeting? And we would just have policy 2 weeks early and that would be that. I know our chair, I believe, is currently away. I did not write down his travel dates because I said in my head, oh, it doesn't matter. He'll be back when we have our October meeting, so it doesn't matter.
I just realized I won't be there on the fourth, so just, that's
Oh.
2 people that.
Okay, okay.
Can I
We
ask
have to make
another
sure
question?
balance. Yeah.
Can you go over what happens if we submit all of the projects policy? Like, what's the
They'd
con
have to make the decision
instead of us?
instead of you.
Got it.
Which,
Yeah.
if I'm right, they do ultimately, and they don't necessarily take our recommendation.
Right.
They didn't take your recommendation
Yeah.
last time. It was definitely, there was definitely some battling. So, I mean, what it comes down to is, most of Marshall's not a municipal staff, but most all of you are municipal staff or are working, or select board member working directly with the community on making some of these decisions on the ground and developing some of these projects. So you bring a level of technical expertise. The policy members, they're volunteer members from your communities that may or may not have technical expertise in transportation planning. And so to that end, your voice is important in that process, in advising them and guiding them and kind of working through some of the nuts and bolts here before it even gets to them. So that's part of that process. It would be interesting to do a joint meeting. It'd be great for everyone to get to know each other, even just from that side.
I'd be for a joint meeting,
Yeah. Okay.
maybe
So we can,
one less thing to do before Thanksgiving
There you go.
with the policy meeting and then Thanksgiving. So we'll send out information in a full, so to speak, of the
yeah.
possibility of a joint meeting.
Yeah, I would honestly, if we do that for the two of you that are also policy members, I might suggest we consolidate the October and November policy meetings just to be November 4th and just do one.
Or, yeah,
So we've done the ranking process.
Yeah.
It's, the 2 Durham projects seem like not just right up against, but they are kind of a drop below the others. And that makes sense to me even with my knowledge of the projects, but there's no Durham rep here.
Right.
And
I
I know that that's what ended up.
Yes.
When the parties who weren't there advocated at the next meeting, it changed everything.
Yep.
And so I wonder if we even say, these are our rankings and they make sense to us.
Yep.
Without necessarily an official recommendation, so that the representatives from the communities on that, because there is a Durham rep policy, right?
Yes.
yes, yep.
And I'm sure they'll have something to say about this. And so it might be worth hearing that before, because the rankings are in itself a type of recommendation.
Yeah, yes, and one of the things that and the rankings were done jointly by TAC and policy members. One of the things that I'm just kind of thinking about and kind of the political side of it is last go around, it was Durham that got cut. it just didn't make the project listing. So I'm looking at it again going, oh my goodness, it could be a repeat of that exact same situation.
Good. There are also, I think, reasons. Durham, I think, is pretty proactive in doing the
Yes.
projects in their community, so the projects they come up with tend to be less in dire need than some other communities that don't have the means to do as many.
When was the last time we came up with? It was a while ago, so I think that's the thing too, we haven't had a representative, we haven't been involved, we haven't, so.
But I know that's wading into the political side, as you said, and that's not really our role here.
Well,
The
but
policies.
I think it's a reasonable consideration
Yeah.
too, that if someone's put forward a project that they weren't able to be here for one reason or another, they may not just be delinquent, they're just not able to be here.
Are we gonna have better cost estimates at that point?
Theoretically, yes. Yeah, that they, we talked to them Tuesday, we're getting them data, so looking at the calendar, Summersworth did their data collection. New Market, you guys have the counters this coming week,
Yeah, we'll be wrapping up midweek next week.
and then Lee, you guys are also doing your counts, so that will be the rest of the data to BHP, so they would have a week to polish up. I know they've already done a couple of them. I think they've done the Durham one, and they're already working on Summersworth, so they have you guys' data for the Sunset and Main Street project.
Yeah, they
Not
were,
the complete street.
yeah, they were trying to get ahead on all of them
Yeah.
as far as they could, while waiting for the remaining counts.
They're on fire because they have 3 other RPCs to do projects as well. So yes, I am confident and hopeful that we would have the real estimates at that point. So, any other thoughts on, I thought that was a good thought, Michael, about the rankings are essentially a recommendation, and if they make sense to you all, ignoring the orders of magnitude of weirdness of my cost estimates, with the Lee bike path probably excessively conservative, and the other ones with many question marks.
Conservative meaning the price is likely much higher than it will.
No,
Then it probably higher than it needs to be.
it's
This
like
is
something
higher.
That's what I
Be
meant.
competitive. How about that?
Yeah, we're calling with ballpark, ballpark high.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
What is the likelihood, because when I'm thinking about what they just said about what should be in here, feeling a little comfortable about the bike path being something that DOT is gonna be excited about, what's the likelihood of that project getting grants somewhere else?
I think it would make an excellent TAC project, that,
But that, in order to pass that, you have to have that, the number like that, and then you have to ask the town for like 400,000, which I know my town would never have.
so there's a guaranteed requirement of a 20% match if you go for a TAC project. Any other discretionary program is guaranteed to have a 20% match.
Right, so,
So that's the trade-off.
so,
And like Bill was saying, that was a really helpful point, but like we met yesterday with DOT folks about the park and ride, and they're gonna come out and ask for input and take that into consideration, but it is their road, and they're gonna have to make the decision that makes the sense from a statewide perspective and the use of that road.
Right.
And they may have a different opinion about a 10-foot wide separated use path.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
That's a really good point to consider about the autonomy that a town takes on the TAC grant with the 20%. And for the sake of discussing it, every 2 years, we also get to say, project X that is in the 10-year plan is no longer a priority for that community, or they want to do something else. And that can get taken out of the 10-year plan and swapped out for another one. Rochester did that to the last cycle where they needed stuff to happen on Route 11 that was a higher priority than a project that was already programmed locally. And they did a dollar for dollar swap for that. The dollars that were on it was a project over on 125 or Columbus Ave, and they were able to take those and apply them to Route 11.
And were they able to do that just because it was already their project that was in there?
That was a happy coincidence that they already had a project in town, and the TAC policy were all okay with that since they already had that money funded, and it just moved across town. Yeah.
Okay.
So that
But it could be a different town could take that.
it could, if both towns are happy with that. Yeah.
So how much of
These guys
the,
are okay with that.
so the question is sort of related. But not really. So with the infrastructure bill, right, the money funding coming, so how much has transportation or how much more money did we get?
That's a really good question. The state as a whole got 20% boost in transportation funding, but there's also a cost escalation of up to 30%. So
on 60 million, that what the state for this bucket
So,
is?
yeah, so what DOT has done, and there is still a lot that's kind of up in the air here. And Bill can speak to this a lot better than I can, but I'm gonna try and share what Bill has previously shared with the RPC directors is that, so what Colin was just explaining, we received just over a 20% increase in federal funding. But we're seeing projects come back 30% higher than budgeted.
Yeah.
So it's those cost escalations are eroding what we're getting for revenue. And so ultimately we're able to do less. The 60 million, what that comes from is that each 10-year plan cycle, DOT takes that total pool of federal funding and using those formulas looks at and says, okay, we're gonna make, this portion of the dollars are going directly to the regional priorities across the state. So all 9 regions split up that 50 million that we've received in the past. In acknowledgement of the state receiving about 20% more, that 50 million for this go around was bumped up to 60 million. And so that's where we're at. Instead of being 4.9 million, we're looking at potentially 5.8 million to allocate for our share of the projects this go around. But all depending on how much things cost, we may see none of that. So that's the other piece of the puzzle, because no matter what we do, the 10-year plan still has to be fiscally constrained. So if everything is that's in there is seeing that rate of inflation or cost escalation, then that's going to erode what's left for those out years of the 10-year plan process. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to plan ahead. We're trying to figure out what those, what it would be if, things are all great and hunky-dory, because the costs are constantly shifting and changing. And so we're essentially operating a year out. So it's going to be like a year from now that this is going through hearings through GASSET. So there's a lot that can change between now and then. And so, plan ahead and expect the worst kind of thing.
So on 60 million, the state of New Hampshire got $12 million more for the infrastructure bill, the transportation.
Oh, the state has far more than that because there's other projects beyond just the regional projects that go into this.
Yeah, the
And
60
Billy
million is just
yeah.
to set aside for the regional planning.
Yeah. Because there's also the system maintenance and operations and all of that good stuff.
The cost escalation is eroding projects that are already in the 10-year plan. So yeah, Somersworth got one bid on a project that was
34 over budget.
34% over what the advertising cost is.
Yeah.
And that's everywhere.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And Rochester up here with the Stratford Square is going through similar issues.
it's not a rosy picture. But kind of, Jill, your question earlier is when we get in the future and in a few weeks, when we have those estimates from VHB, the role of the TAC is all the more important because you can, you guys collectively have experience that can say, well, that I don't think stormwater treatment was incorporated there. So how do we really, we need more information there, or, that level of detail where the policy committee are thinking at the policy level. So to your thought, Michael, what do you all think about the current state of things where, at this point, our allocation plus 1 or 2 projects gets us 5 out of 7 of the projects that went forward, considering that there is.
I have a question
Yes.
on that. So the New Market intersection improvements
Yes.
have high variability in what we have for an estimate. So what if VHP comes back with an estimate that's twice this, and that changes the allocation? So then we would only be able to do the top 2, and maybe then the additional 2 are the lead projects, and it bumps Summersworth off the list. Is that, we're making our recommendation with what we have now,
Yes.
but is that the information that we're going to be talking about next month when we have?
No, we'll be
It'll all
making,
change next month.
Okay.
we'll be making more detailed estimates or a more detailed decision next month where hopefully the lead bike path estimate would lower and another one may bump up, like the New Market one. So, yeah, things will shift. I like that.
So, another thing, there's the ranking that everyone did, but there's also the ability to say, well, looking at this holistically, the best package of projects that we could put forward would be, I'm just gonna be arbitrary here, 1, 2, 4, 6. You could do that as the TAC and make that recommendation.
And
So is the Durham representative gonna be here next?
The Durham representative is almost always here for policy meetings. But
Why not wait to?
if we're,
TAC, not so much.
if we're gonna
They should.
if we're gonna have a joint meeting, it would be fair to defer any kind of formal decision to that. And the beginning of the meeting could lead off with the TAC discussed X, Y, and Z, and here's the ranking, and they all looked reasonable, but we didn't have cost estimates. And I certainly would fault you all for saying, well, we don't have enough information to make a reasonable decision based on the lack of detailed cost.
From a purely technical perspective, the first 5 makes sense to me. It doesn't factor in the political question, which I kind of want the Durham representative to be able to speak to that. That's really more the policy decision.
Mhm.
And then, that it's hard to pick and choose different ones without the final, because that's what makes you
Agreed.
jump out of order.
Yep.
So I think it makes a lot of sense to say, technically, this ranking makes sense to us, but we need those 2 details before the final decision should be made.
Like as a taxpayer, I would. Or like, I would want to think of a different, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's value when we know the actual cost. You can say, okay, what is that?
I also have a question. So the Durham Point Road, that was presented as a paving project, but when VHB does their estimate, do they have, that's kind of a vague scope, because then it also goes to safety improvements.
Yep.
Does VHB talk with the town to develop like more defined scope, or are they just assuming it's just being?
That was presented by the town as in 10 years, we know we're gonna have to do a paving reclamation, and this is also a heavily used road by cyclists, so we want to make some improvements along the way. And that's what they kind of stuck to.
So I just drove that this past weekend, and in order for that, there's so much infrastructure that will have to, well, like, I mean, it's literally the road. So I just don't, I think that that's gonna end up as a pretty amazing. That's a lot of road.
Yeah.
That's gonna be huge. I just don't even know where, it would be, I think it would take the entire time.
But it's not, yeah, to your point, it's not really just a paving project.
No, it's an enormous, like,
Yeah.
complicated, and you've got water and wetlands and that's huge.
And this isn't really where just paving is done, like that,
Right.
this is, that's not, paving projects aren't what we do here.
And it is a local road as well, so that's in the, you know, the facility importance category. It's in that. So
I just have a question. So when is this due to DOT by for
Mhm.
TAC to make a decision? Because what happens if we can't get a form for next meeting? I've been at a lot of
Very
meetings
good
lately,
point.
then there's not forums.
We'll be on the phone the
Day
day before
before.
to make sure we have quorum.
I
And
know, I
then-
got $100 for showing up.
Well, so here's the thing, from DOT's perspective, they're not necessarily, for this preliminary list, they're not requiring votes by TAC and policy.
Okay.
We do not think that's necessarily appropriate because we as staff are not the decision makers. The committees are the decision makers. And so if we're doing something where projects are not advancing, we feel that your voices and the policy committee's voices are important to decide which projects do not advance at this point. So,
well, that's,
hence, have a conversation, if we can't get a formal vote, we don't get a vote, but that's not, I don't like that.
Right.
Well,
I
we
want
say in
forums.
the absence of a vote, you go by the rankings.
Yes,
That's fair. We've already done a lot of.
Yes.
that would be the.
ultimately, yes.
So, yeah, if we're gonna have the joint meeting, we would be pounding people and making sure we have
Oh, yeah.
a full form.
I just have a question then.
Yeah.
I don't want us to be in the same situation.
I understand and value that we should get the Durham's input at the meeting.
Yep.
If you need us to vote, can we vote or recommend, I mean, not vote, but recommend the projects as they are unless there's discussion from Durham, or is that kind of a moot point? Because that's probably what we'll discuss in the fourth.
Either, honestly.
Okay.
I mean, that's what happened last year is that, representatives weren't here at TAC and they realized, oh my gosh, we screwed up by not showing up at TAC. And so the towns made sure that they had their representatives at policy and the conversation changed. But that was at the final vote stage. This is good that we're taking it seriously at this round because that didn't happen at the first round and we had to make some really tough decisions at the very end. So this is good.
And Farmington cut part of their project, so another one
Yeah.
could fit as part of that,
Yes.
which was extremely generous.
Yes.
You're looking for a motion.
It could, you can make a motion to defer the decision to the joint meeting or make a formal recommendation that I would pass on to the policy committee today saying we're planning on having a joint meeting. to make
So if it's just a recommendation, I'll make a motion just for consideration. And move that the TAC supports the rankings as presented and the submittal of the first 5 projects according to the rankings and the allocation, but would like to see updated estimated costs and input from Durham and recommends that policy consider, they're gonna, whether we recommend or not, but, if we we acknowledge the absence of that information in our recommendation. That makes sense. You can word
Yeah.
that.
That's on the recording.
Yeah, it's recorded. Megan will do some magic.
Yeah.
Off the discussion.
Yeah, any discussion?
I agree with
Mr.
All right,
Okay,
go around that.
Vanessa Price,
Yes. Lindsay Butler, yes.
Goldberg, yes.
Michelle Mears, yes.
Chelsea Greenie, yes.
Adjourn Casper, yes.
Chair votes yes, okay.
And, a vote from. A vote from DOT? I don't know, Bill or Kim, if you want to vote on that.
Yes.
or-
Yes.
it's the same year, but it has to be million.
yes.
2022 is so fun.
Tim, are you there?
Yes. I vote yes.
Yes, it is.
Are we all set on that topic then?
We are all set on that topic.
We want to do the minutes?
We can go back to minutes. I guess just doesn't need a motion, but maybe just like straw hands, joint meeting on November 4th to see the finals and have policy, okay, done.
So, minutes, please.
Okay. Then we have the minutes from September 2nd. We can get a motion to approve those or amend them.
I move to approve the minutes from September 2nd, that we should.
Yes.
Yes.
They're in the back.
Second.
Second. Okay. Any discussion? Do we have to do a roll call on that one too?
We do.
Vanessa Price, aye.
I abstain. Lindsay Butler, abstain.
Goldberg, yes.
Sean, yes.
Except for a, it's adding.
Adjourn Casper, yes.
Tim, vote on the minutes,
Yes.
and Kim.
Yeah,
I abstain.
okay, so I was just trying to figure out the totals on.
Right, I think we're good on that. All right, wow, it's already 10:30. Let's just skip to other business, community updates. Anything heading into the fall, any fun stuff?
You know any CDL drivers, tell them to call me. Don't call any of you, just call me.
All right, thank you all. I know it's a complex situation and we're in this weird growing pain phase where the previous round we didn't have engineering support and all this other detail. And yeah, we got started the day after the 10-year plan was approved and now it's still more complex and somehow still running up against deadlines. So thank you all for your input.
It's a really positive move that we are getting this engineering support. That's,
Yeah.
it's good.
It will be a really big deal building out the metro plan where we don't have to wait for them as part of the deadline to bid those. We'll pull from our existing pool of design projects. So we can hash out the details as we go along.
Yeah, so that's one thing to kind of think forward to. We need to get through, this current list and this current batch, but moving forward, one of the things that we need to consider is just how we scope engineering into our UPWP, our Unified Work Program. And that's something that I think, as I was just kind of thinking through it this morning, getting around on my way here, one thought is it'd be really great for us to prospectively include that. This has been something where we've reacted because it's been like oh, hey, opportunity, do it, go. So thinking forward, we'll be next week starting conversations with DOT to scope out our next 2 years of our UPWP programming. And so thinking about putting that in at the beginning, going through that RFQ process before next fiscal year even starts, so that we can have this as a rolling basis. So as projects come in, we can have that scoped and set up so that we can continually be building and doing this engineering, so that we don't get to this like concentrated period of all 9 regions, like frantically trying to scoop up the few engineering firms that are out there in New Hampshire and all do these reviews at the same time. So just a kind of a process flow improvement for the future for us all to keep in mind.
One other process,
I think it really helps the rural communities as well.
Mhm.
And that's an important thing, where
Yeah.
they don't have the engineering staff,
Exactly.
so.
Yeah, for sure.
one other process thing that I thought of, and it might have been the last policy meeting, but you went through a presentation on each of the projects. And that was, I don't know, halfway through people scoring them. So I know I'd already done a bunch of that work, and compared to working through the papers, I found that very helpful. I wonder if, rather than getting to the end and having communities advocate for their project after kind of the scoring is in, if prior to us opening up the scoring, there was an opportunity for more of a advocacy presentation of this is what we're trying to accomplish, and maybe
Yeah.
even the community being able to have 5 minutes to
I love that.
explain or make a video showing this is the intersection, this is the problem, this is how we plan to solve it. That might go a long way in just having the context to score more accurately and maybe preemptively address some of those community advocacy issues rather than at the end. But just a thought.
I think that's great. And I think that would be a key part of, like, here's our pool of projects, who wants to prioritize their project, and tell us why you think it is important, rather than me trying to scrape together information.
Because some of these I drive through and I understand. And then some of them, I've never driven through that intersection, and I could drive out there, but I'm not familiar enough with it to really get it. And the paper.
You've got a carpool here too. We gotta go with bus.
We can all get on bus.
Coordinate a bus tour of the project.
And every time you feel like your life's in danger, you get like extra points for the project.
So that was it from our end. Thank you all for being here on Holiday Weekend Friday. Let's go adjourn.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.